Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections, along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the weakening of multilateralism and what options India has in such a scenario. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the importance of increasing the female labor force participation rate, the related challenges, and the way forward. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a discussion with respect to 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026, along with a value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to India's path in a post-multilateral world. In the aftermath of the Second World War, what we saw was the development of a particular world order, which was dominated by the international institutions, for example, the United Nations. But what we saw with time was the weakening of these institutions. And especially after 2000, there was a question mark on the very legitimacy of these organizations. That's the first part. The second part relates to the policies of President Trump. So Trump, in his first term, which started in 2017 till 2021, came up with a campaign known as America First, where he put the national interest at the center stage, where he had a kind of a transactional relationship with different countries around the world. In his second term, this thing has aggravated. Now he's basically pressurizing different countries so as to make sure that those countries offer him trade concessions and then they can come in a bilateral strategic partnership, trade partnership. So what you have to understand is we have this particular column written by a distinguished IAS officer, Mukul Sanwal. Now what he says that in such a scenario, where US is exercising such policies, there is the breakdown of multilateral world order. So what options India has? The article is very important and it offers the way forward for India. And we'll have an elaborate discussion. It's going to be a very important discussion, especially from the perspective of GS2 international relations. Now, let's talk about the very first concept of multilateralism. What do we mean by multilateralism? See, it's a mechanism. It's a diplomatic approach where different countries come together so as to basically resolve the issues of common nature, right? For example, climate change, trade, terrorism, right? So as to make sure that there is an effective solution for these causes, different countries come together. Now, it is but obvious that if multiple countries are coming together, they would have a particular framework. They would have a particular framework with respect to the institutions through which they can have a discussion and come to a solution. So it is basically based upon the international institutions. For example, we have the United Nations, we have the World Trade Organization, right? Again, in this particular mechanism, what you have to understand is that there is an aspect of consensus, and consensus is used with respect to the decision making, where different countries come together, discuss, and then they reach to a particular solution, and then finally that is executed. Now, again, we have different challenges. As I told you, we have the ill effects of climate change, we have the global health concerns, the recently observed COVID-19 pandemic, and the other causes, for example, terrorism. So as to resolve or to have solutions for these things, we have the mechanism of multilateralism. I hope that is clear. What are the prominent multilateral institutions around the world? We have the United Nations, which was primarily established so as to secure the peace and development of different countries around the world. Next, we have the World Trade Organization, which primarily focuses upon facilitating the trade aspects so as to reduce the tariff and non-tariff barriers. Then we have the World Health Organization, which looks into the overall health aspects, right? Now, one thing is very important. In order to understand multilateralism, you'll have to understand how this particular thing has evolved. And recently, we also had the discussion with respect to the strategic autonomy. And over there, I talked about the world order. So what you have to understand is that as the world order changes, the aspects of multilateralism also change. So one thing is very clear, that the aspects of multilateralism, they are based upon the changing global dynamics, which is nothing but the world order. Again, for your revision, world order is nothing but the distribution of powers and authority around the world, among different countries, among the international institutions. That is what you have to understand. Now, if you look at the post-World War, there was a kind of birth of multilateral institutions. The very first was the United Nations, peace and international security. That was the very objective. And we also had the inception of Bretton Woods institutions in the form of International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group, right? So these two are the Bretton Woods institutions. Next, we had the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. This was primarily to facilitate trade among different countries, right? Because what the US at that time found was that trade is a very important component so as to have prosperity in different countries around the world, right? Money is going to give you peace. That is what the US believed in. Next aspect was that of the Cold Era and the limited multilateralism. Now we all know that in the Cold War, there were the two power blocks, one led by the US, what they called as the propagators of liberal ideology. The other was the erstwhile USSR, Soviet Union, which basically said that they are basically propagating the ideology of communism. Now, it is but obvious that if you have two different opposing ideologies, there would not be much support with respect to multilateralism. So that is what we observed. What we saw was that there was limited interaction and there was a period of limited multilateralism, right? So multilateralism took a backseat because different countries had a kind of an ideological mindset. You must be aware of NATO, right? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You must be aware of Warsaw Pact, right? So different countries were basically armed together in different groups, in primarily two groups, and which were at loggerheads with each other. So ultimately the aspects or the prospects of multilateralism were quite low in nature. Next aspect is, even in this period, what we saw was the multilateral cooperation in some areas. You would ask, which were those areas? After the Second World War, there was a great impetus on the reconstruction and development. So when we are talking about the reconstruction and development of the European countries, there was this aspect of multilateralism. Different countries were coming together and cooperating in some domains. Next, we have the post-Cold War expansion and globalization. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, what US primarily re-emphasized, I'm using the word re-emphasized, on the ideology of liberal international economic order. Liberal international economic order primarily focuses upon reducing the trade barriers, promoting greater investments, and that is nothing but the core of globalization. So it was the liberal international world order, economic order, which primarily led to or gave emphasis to the aspects of globalization. There was more emphasis upon increasing the trade volumes among different countries around the world. And what we saw was the inception of World Trade Organization. So we had the Uruguay round, which started in 1986 till 1994, right? This was the 8th round of the negotiations with respect to the trade, with respect to the GATT. So it was the 8th round of the negotiations with respect to GATT. And ultimately it was in 1995 that we had the inception of World Trade Organization, right? This period also witnessed the sudden expansion of European Union. So we saw the aspects of multilateralism in a regional space in European countries. Next, we saw the emergence of new multilateral forums. Now, again, understand, it was in 2001 that China joined the World Trade Organization, and it was primarily on the insistence of the US. And slowly what we saw was the aggressive rise of China. And at that particular moment of time, where we had different thinkers in US, they said that we need to cooperate or we need to have a strong relationship with China. And it was in this particular context that we had the APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, where both China as well as the US are its members, right? Next, you have to understand with respect to climate change. Think about the Rio Summit of 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. The key point or the milestone with respect to the environmental governance around the world. Or let's talk about the human rights. You must be aware of Paris principles. So these were the years where we focus upon these aspects. And there were the signals of multilateralism in these domains, right? Let's come to 21st century. Slowly with time, what we began to observe were newer challenges. There was the growth of fundamentalism and ultimately extremism. There was the growth of terrorism around the world. The ill effects of climate change started to increase. There was a kind of the flux with respect to the financial management. And you must be aware of 2008 global financial crisis, which was nothing but the bursting of a housing bubble. And it created panic among different countries around the world. You must be aware of the recession, which India had in 2009 and 10, right? But even at this time, one of the very important organizations which basically reinvigorated or re-sparked the international economy was the G20. Again, formed way back in 1999. That is what you have to understand. Next aspect is that we saw the emergence of different countries. What I generally talk about is there were the emergence of different poles around the world. Be it China, be it India, be it Germany, be it Japan, be it Korea. What we call as a multipolar world order. And there what we saw was the emergence of new institutions, new mechanisms of having relationships among different countries, new partnerships in the form of BRICS. 2009, Yekaterinburg Summit. And in 2010, South Africa joined BRICS, right? That is how you'll have to see the whole picture, right? Next, we have the coming of none other than Mr. Trump in his first presidency. As I told you, that he had this particular campaign of America First, where what he said was that America is not going to focus upon the international affairs. We are not going to spend billions of dollars in different institutions around the world, and we are going to focus or invest those billions of dollars in America itself. And therefore, there was a kind of transactional relationship which we saw of America with different countries. You must be aware that it was the US which imposed almost tariffs to the tune of 25% of worth of Chinese goods, which were basically imported in the US, 300 billion US dollars. So that is what you have to understand. Next, we had the COVID-19. COVID-19 was the instance which basically told us that what were the loopholes, what are the serious issues with respect to the global health governance. You must be aware that we have the World Health Organization, but it literally failed when we talk about fixing the accountability of the disease, or when we talk about the distribution of medical supplies to different countries around the world, especially the developing and the least developed countries. So that is one of the issues which WHO suffered. Next aspect is that of Trump 2.0. Now, when we are talking about Trump 2.0, he came up with a particular campaign, which is Make America Great Again. Now, the very objective of this particular thing is that US should intensively focus upon its national development. It should re-emerge as the preponderant power in the world. It should focus upon its technological development. And for that, it has to come in strategic partnerships on a bilateral basis. And that's the reason you must be observing that President Trump, what he's trying to do is, right now, he's basically extracting trade concessions by pressurizing different countries and then coming in trade partnership. So that is nothing but affecting the multilateral institutions around the world, be it the World Trade Organization, be it the World Health Organization, be it the other agreements. So this is what you have to understand. In such a scenario, what should be India's position, or what paths India has? Now, before that, let's talk about the importance of multilateralism. We talked about, how different activities, especially the US, how they are basically shaping or affecting the multilateral world order. But what you have to understand is that what has been the importance of multilateralism. See, we cannot directly negate its importance. The very first is global peace and security. United Nations, though it's a body which has not been able to fructify its objectives, to reach to its objectives, but it has played a very important role when we talk about the peacekeeping. And according to a report which was published by the UN itself, what it says is that in the last decade, there has been almost 25% reduction when we talk about the violent incidents because of the peacekeeping forces around the world, right? For example, we have the peacekeeping force in different countries around the world. Let's say we have the South Sudan, we have Mali. So because of that, there has been a reduction in the violent activities around the world. Next, we have economic stability and trade. General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs and its revamped version of World Trade Organization. That has, to a great extent, made to reduce the trade barriers among different countries. And this has led to the increase, and according to WTO report itself, it has led to an increase of almost 25% increase in the overall trade volume from a period of 2010 to 2019, right? Also, we have G20. G20 has been coming together. We have the finance ministers, we have the head of the states, head of the governments coming together and coming up in different partnerships with the help of G20. And ultimately, it is reinvigorating the trade partnerships. Then we have environmental and health cooperation. You must be aware, we have the Paris Agreement, which ultimately, because of it, 190 countries came on board together and they have set a target. Every country has its own nationally determined contribution, NDCs, right? Next, we have COVID-19. COVID-19, again, see, definitely there were issues with respect to the working of the World Health Organization, but it has also played an important role. When we talk about the supply of vaccines to least developed countries, though they were delayed, definitely, but it is the role of WHO WHO has played definitely an important role when we talk about having a parity with respect to the global health aspects, right? Now, what are the challenges being faced by multilateralism? The very first is geopolitical tensions. Geopolitical tensions have to be analyzed keeping two countries in mind. We have the US on one hand, we have China on the other. And the question is why we are looking in such a way. Because when you talk about the ideology, both are ideologically different. Initial Cold War was with respect to US and erstwhile USSR. Now we have the Cold War 2.0 between the US and the China. So it is ideologically driven. Second thing which you have to understand is when we talk about military, when we talk about diplomatic outreach, when we talk about the economic powerhouses, economic capacity, both these countries are dominant players around the world. So the kind of interactions these countries have definitely has one or the other effect on the overall aspect, on the global governance. And that is the reason the geopolitical differences between the US and China, they have shaped and they have affected the multilateral aspects, strained the multilateral platforms. The primary example is the WTO, World Trade Organization, especially when we talk about the dispute resolution mechanism of the WTO. Then let's talk about the economic inequality and power imbalance. See, what you have to understand, and is also said by Dr. Jaishankar, Minister for External Affairs, that the kind of institutions which were set up in the aftermath of 1945, in the aftermath of the World War II, they basically reflect the geopolitical realities of that time. Take, for example, we have the shares or the quota system in the IMF or the permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council. These things do not reflect the realities of today. So we have countries like India, we have countries like Germany, we have countries like Japan. So they are also playing a very important role when we talk about the global governance. They're also very important player when we talk about the overall economy. Very important military pillars around the world. So if these organizations are not reflecting the realities, definitely their credibility would be at stake. That is what you have to understand, right? So disproportionate influence in the institutions. We are talking about the Western countries, the developed countries, primarily who are responsible of framing these institutions. See, it was the US which primarily emphasized upon the formation of UN or the other bodies. And now it is the one which is having an isolationist approach. That is the kind of policy which US has been showcasing, the realist policies, right? COVID-19 pandemic amplified inequality. World Inequality Lab, what it said, that especially after the COVID-19, there has been an aggravated inequality among different countries on the world. Or even in a particular country, the rich people have become more richer and the poor have become poorer. So the economic inequality or the wealth inequality has deepened in the societies. And therefore, there is a reason that we need to have more strong multilateral bodies so that they can focus upon every society in an equal manner. Then we have the rise of unilateralism and nationalism. So again, we have Mr. Trump, and we have already discussed this. The Trump's administration has been focusing upon the revitalization of its own interest, revitalization of the technological prowess of the US. And what it is saying is, what President Trump says is that these international institutions, they're useless. Take, for example, the coming out from the Paris Accord or the coming out from the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, what we call as the Iran nuclear deal, or reducing the funding of the World Health Organization, or signing on the executive papers that we are going to come out from the World Health Organization. Or let's talk about the lowering of the funding with respect to UNESCO. So these actions, what they reflect is that US is having a narrow policy right now. It is focusing upon its own narrow national interest, right? Again, we have the bilateral trade deals where countries are being pressurized that if you won't do this, we are going to give you or impose this much tariff on your products. Again, next aspect is of Chinese nationalism. Now, this is very important to understand. Why? Because we're just focusing upon the US. See, if US has come up with such policies, there must be a reason. And the reason is this, China. There has been a growing nationalism, an aggressive form of nationalism in China. What we call as that China has a middle kingdom syndrome. It does not look at different countries at the same level. So that is one of the reasons. And there is a growth of authoritarianism in China. There is an unprecedented scale of economic growth which has been witnessed in China. And that is one of the prime reasons that US doesn't want. And also in the Indo-Pacific, look at the broader context. In the Indo-Pacific, there has been the aggressive rise of China, primarily when we talk about the South China Sea, right? Now, next aspect is of Brexit. Now, why Brexit? Because the exit of the UK from the European Union, what it signifies was the weakening of the European Union as an organization. Therefore, the weakening of the multilateral concept. Next, we have the financial constraints. See, these organizations, they have a very large mandate. That is what you have to understand. Be it United Nations or be it World Health Organization or be it World Trade Organizations. They have been given very big mandates. So many number of tasks which these bodies have to perform. But at the same time, you have to understand that they do not have the adequate finances. For example, according to UN itself, what it says that almost on a yearly basis, it has a deficit of almost 1.5 billion US dollars with respect to just its peacekeeping forces. Same goes with the WHO, and it is primarily dependent upon the voluntary contributions, not the SS contributions. Voluntary contributions are basically depend upon the will of the countries. So they are not uniform, right? Next, we have the inefficiency and bureaucracy. Whatever projects these bodies have, especially for the developing or the least developed countries, what you have to understand is that there is the involvement of the slow and ineffective bureaucracy. The funding takes a lot of time, the project execution takes a lot of time, and therefore many of these countries, what they say is that we don't really want the involvement of these countries or these institutions, primarily because of the kind of low performance they have in the project execution. Also, we have WTO's appellate body. There are no people who can basically decide upon the disputes, primarily because of the resistance of the US in appointing the judges to the appellate body of the WTO. So that is one of the very important concerns. Now, what the editorial says, as I told you, the editorial points towards the scenario, what scenario we have, and it also gives us a way forward, what India should do in such a scenario. What the author says is that there has been a decline of multilateralism and the rise of strategic bilateralism. Rise of strategic bilateralism. Important keyword you should use in the answers. There has been a decline of institutions like the United Nations, and it has led to a fragmented global order. Countries, especially like the US, they are now focusing more upon bilateral deals, not these setups, not WTO or these setups. Next aspect is that countries, especially the US, they are now having a unilateral trade measures. That is, they are basically pressurizing different countries and then extracting the trade concessions and then coming up into partnerships, saying that if you won't do this, we are going to impose these much of tariffs on your products. So therefore, the countries have no option but to come or agree to what US says or other countries say. Next, we have the BRICS summit. This is important. What the author says is that the BRICS summit has failed to recognize the erosion of multilateralism around the world. There is no mention of reinvigoration of the multilateral setup in its final words. Next, we have, in this particular scenario, what opportunity India has. In this particular flux, what opportunity India has. Now, what the author says is that India has the potential to emerge as the third largest economy by the year 2027. And it can also surpass the US economy by the year 2075. Therefore, there is a huge potential. There is a silver lining, and India should work upon that. India should accept the end of multilateralism. India should not be in a hope that these organizations, these international institutions, there would be a day and these international organizations would have life within them. No. We should accept that there is the end of the multilateralism and countries are now resorting to the bilateral or minilateral settlements. What the author says is that India should focus upon three important areas. Important, and you should also cite these things in your answer. See, again, the very objective of this particular analysis is to give you the keywords, to give you that perspective, so that you can use that perspective in your answer, right? So what should be the focus areas on which India should basically delve upon? The very first is national prosperity. That we should focus upon our own national prosperity, not to be concerned about what is happening around the world. Second thing, we should focus upon the strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy we recently discussed. That is, the national interest must be at the center stage while we are dealing with the other countries around the world. We are not saying that we are your partner, we are in your alliance or we are in your alliance. We are partners of all. But we will go as per our own national interest. Third thing is, And again, one thing which I would like to emphasize is national prosperity also means greater investments in our own development, right? Third thing which the author talks about is greater partnership with respect to South-South cooperation. So we should divert our attention from the Western countries towards the other countries, be it the African countries or the countries in the Latin America, and come up with greater partnerships with these countries, right? This is what the author says. Next, we have reorienting the economic strategies. The same thing, that we should divert our attention with respect to the economy. We have what we are having with respect to the European Union or the Western countries, and focus the shift towards the ASEAN countries and have a policy. Try to realize this aspect of look east. Tell me the name of the Prime Minister who started with the look east policy, right? For trade ideas. So that shift towards the ASEAN countries, they are working upon the technological development. They are having the kind of production which is low cost. So learn from them, right? Offset the losses with respect to infrastructure. What do we mean? If the US is imposing tariffs on India's imports, that is the imports which are basically going towards the US, and if US is imposing tariffs on them, definitely India would have no opportunity. So what India should do, rather than exporting those items, for example, the steel or aluminium to the US, India should make use of those products in its own development. What China did. In China, in 2013, what the author says, that China, as almost 50% of its GDP, it invested in the infrastructure development. Can you understand? Can you even imagine? 50% of GDP. And that's the reason what we have witnessed is the faster growth of economic pace, which has been witnessed in the China, right? So that is what India has to do. Next is technological strength and fourth industrial revolution. Very, very important. Technology, we all know, be it cloud computing, be it machine learning, be it artificial intelligence, be it blockchain. This is the future. So therefore, India must consistently invest in these technologies. What the author also says is, when we talk about the generative AI patents, and it's a very good news, you can also quote this particular thing in your answers, that when we talk about the generative AI patents, India has surpassed the UK and the Germany. So this tells about the kind of prospects which we have, right? Prospects of growth in these domains of technology. Next, we have evolving military doctrine. We already saw what happened in Operation Sindoor, that we had a very fixed retaliatory approach with respect to the kind of attacks we inflicted on our neighbor, Pakistan. And what you have to understand is that this basically showcased the kind of new stature or the kind of new doctrine which India is going to exercise if someone does harms to us. That is what you have to understand. But for that, one thing is very important. We have to reduce the reliance on imported military platforms. We saw the efficacy and the efficiency of S-400 or the other defense systems or the other attacking systems. And definitely there was also the involvement of indigenous defense platforms. But we'll have to slowly increase the development or the investments with respect to the indigenous development of these defense platforms. That is one of the core aspects, be it the cyber aspects, be it the missiles, be it drones, satellites. Next aspect is, if we are going to do this, this would give us the defense autonomy. And that would be very crucial to exercise strategic autonomy. That is how you link it, right? Next is resolving border issues for growth. What we are trying to say. See, recently, the defense minister had interaction with the Chinese counterpart. And what the kind of statement we had was that there has to be a kind of trust building with respect to the boundaries of India-China. And this was taken in a good way by the Chinese authorities. So what the author says is that there are prospects. We cannot be in that imaginary world of historical grievances, that this has been our partner and this has inflicted serious damage on us, so we'll have the same kind of relationship. No, we'll have to look for better options. And therefore, if Chinese authorities definitely agree to a point, we can have this trust building aspect, right? Next is Operation Sindoor. What it signals. According to the author, what he says is that though we were very capable when we talk about the military preparedness, but ultimately diplomacy has been the solution. Diplomacy ultimately is the solution for every issue. And therefore, we need to invest in ourselves. Next aspect is BRICS 2026 summit. When India is going to be the president, what India should do while using the BRICS platform. That is what the author is emphasizing upon. The very first is revive the global south. Very, very important. We should shift our attention from the Western countries and focus upon these countries of the global South, because they are going to give us the market opportunities. And we cannot look just from the economic angle. We cannot have a transactional lens like the US is having. We need to have the products at low cost for these markets. That is one of the very important points. Reorient tariffs and value chains. Integrate more with countries of Latin America. You must be aware of critical minerals. So we have to basically have a more integrated, more robust partnerships with these countries of global South, be it African countries or Latin American countries. The general way forward, as I told you, strengthening the minilateral and regional alliances. There has to be like-minded coalitions, issue-based partnerships. If we cannot go for multilateral setups, let's go for issue-based partnerships. Let's talk about the peace and tranquility in the Indo-Pacific. We have the Quad. Let's talk about reinvigorating or revitalizing the renewable energy sources. We have the International Solar Alliance. Let's talk about the Global South, having closer partnerships. We have the BRICS. So issue-based partnerships. Then again, this would also focus upon the regional development and innovation, right? Next, we have the reformation of the international institutions. I've already told this, that the institutions which were framed or formed in the aftermath of the Second World War, they do not reflect the current geopolitical identity or realities. They are not reflecting the realities of the present world order. So we'll have to basically revamp, reform these institutions. For example, the UNSC or the IMF or the other institutions. Let's say we have the G4 countries. Please write that what is G4 countries and what is the objective. See, the objective I'll tell you. You just tell me the name of these countries. The objective is to have a permanent seat in the UNSC. So we have a group of 4 countries. So they must be included in the global high table, what we call as the UNSC, right? So as to increase the representation. Revisiting the WTO's dispute resolution process. It cannot be just, taken for granted. We'll have to reform or make sure that the dispute resolution mechanism of the WTO is basically reinvigorated. It is revitalized, right? Greater investments in sustainable development goals. Because of the conflicts and turmoil we have, be it Russia-Ukraine war, or be it Israel-Palestine conflict, the recently Israel-Iran conflict, or what US is doing with respect to China or other countries, we have basically forgot that what our objectives were. And we need to come back to this thing of sustainable development goals, and we need to achieve them by 2030. And this is really very important. We have to reduce the economic disparities, which have deepened especially after the COVID-19. So we must refocus or shift the focus to this particular area rather than just having our attention to these conflicts and issues. Annual investment of almost $5 to $7 trillion is required for achieving the sustainable development goals by 2030, and this is according to the UNDP. And $5 to $7 trillion is not a small amount. For that, the different countries must come on board. Next, we have digital and technological cooperation. We have so many challenges in the form of climate change, the ill effects of climate change. For example, we have, for example, these countries of LDCs, least developed countries, or SIDS, small island developing states. They are the most affected with respect to the ill effects of climate change. So we need to focus upon these countries, right? Global health crisis, and they all need technological initiative. You would ask how? How technology is important with respect to climate change. Let's talk about the renewable energy. They require technological investments, right? Let's talk about the battery storage systems. Let's talk about the other systems. All require technological interventions. Or talk about the health crisis. Be it the disease diagnosis, be it the disease surveillance, or the transmission of knowledge with respect to a particular disease. All require the infusion of technology, the integration of technology. For example, we had the COVAX, or we had the GPI, that is a global partnership on artificial intelligence. So as to have the benefits of the AI must be distributed equitably around the world. So what we are saying is that the current world order, it's in a state of flux, primarily because of the policies of the US. But India should look at this particular flux as an opportunity, and we need to basically do this. We need to come up with these things and make ourselves strong internally. Focus upon the economic development, focus upon the technological development, focus upon the military preparedness, indigenous defense platforms. Right? So this is again a very important topic. Let's have a mains practice question, and I really want you guys to write the answer. In the light of recent global developments, discuss the notion of end of multilateralism, analyze the factors contributing to perceived decline, and suggest ways as to how India should navigate in a post-multilateral world. Again, a very important topic. UPSC has been asking questions, especially for those of you who are having PSR as an optional. You can have enough content from this particular discussion. And again, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also let us know in the comment. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to her turn to earn, fixing the female labor force participation rate. So we have the periodic labor force survey, and it has given a data with respect to the month of June for the female labor force participation rate. And it says that there has been a reduction of 1 percentage point as compared to the May figures when we talk about the female labor force participation rate, both in the urban as well as rural areas. And government has given its own reasons why there has been a reduction. So the government says that we had an intense heat and therefore the number of people working outside, it reduced, and therefore we have a reduction in the values of the June. But what we are going to do today is we are going to look at the picture in a more broad manner. We will see that why increase of the female labor force participation rate is not just important for the economy, but also important for the society. What are the challenges? What have been the government initiatives and what should be the way forward? So it's going to be, again, a broad discussion, part of GS2, social sector women, and GS3, inclusive growth. Now, let's talk about first, what is labor force participation rate? Proportion of labor force in the total population. Question is, what is labor force? People who are working or who are actively seeking work. So you have this, you have, let's say, the labor force and you have the total population. This is what the labor force participation rate is. And the labor force comprises of those people who are working or who are seeking the work, actively seeking the work. I hope that's clear. Now, what is the mechanism to basically measure these things? For example, the worker population ratio or the unemployment rate or the labor force participation rate. We have a particular survey which is known as periodic labor force survey. Periodic labor force survey is carried out by the National Statistics Organization. Why I'm telling you this is because of the prelims. There can be a particular question in the prelims. And it is a part of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. This is what you have to understand. Periodic labor force survey is carried in two ways. Again, important. The very first is the current weekly status. What do we mean by current weekly status? That is, the reference period is just 1 week preceding the survey. So let's say we have the survey which is done. So the 1 week which has just preceded the survey, that is the current weekly survey. And then we have the second, the usual status. Usual status, the reference period is bigger, and that is 365 days preceding the survey, 1 year. I hope that's clear. So we have the PLFS being carried in two ways. One is through the current weekly status and through the usual status. What we generally look, whenever we talk about the broad picture, we look at the usual status. I hope that is clear. Now, if I were to go into the numbers, the labor force participation rate in the year 2024, right, it was 60.1%. Remember this. And if you just look at this particular infographic, you will see that the labor force participation rate has basically, it was 55.2% in the year 2022. So there has been an increase from 55.2 to 60.1%. That is what you have to understand. Let's talk about the male labor force participation rate. Again, for when we talk about the gender aspect, it is 78.8%. with respect to the year 2024. When we talk about the year 2022, look at this. It was 77.2. There has been an increase. Good news. Let's talk about this. Female labor force participation rate, which is the essence of today's discussion. Female labor force participation rate, and it's wrong. Sorry. It's actually 41.7%. Remember this. 41.7% with respect to 2024. And look at this. What it was 32.8% in the year 2022. I hope that is clear. It has increased and we must appreciate that, right? But again, the issue is that when compared to other countries around the world, it is quite low. We'll have a discussion, don't worry. Good news is that there has been the increasing trend towards the female labor force participation rate, especially when we talk about the rural India. There has been almost 12% increase when we take the reference period from 2018 to 2022. Look at this particular graph. Look at this red line. There has been a continuous increase. And that is what almost a 12% increase is, right? But as I said, that compared to the world average, according to the World Bank, the world average in the year 2020 was almost 49% in the year 2020. And right now what we have is 41.1%. Right? So again, there's a huge scope. If we just look at different countries, especially the adjoining countries like Vietnam or Bangladesh or China, over there, the female labor force participation rate is more than 65%. So there is a huge possibility, there's a huge scope which India can have. The reason you have to understand is that why do we have lower participation of women in the workforce? What is the primary reason? The primary reason is that there is the unequal distribution when we talk about the unpaid family labor work. Most of the unpaid family labor is done by the females. We all know what our sisters and our mothers, and including those of you who are married, like their wife contribute in the overall household chores. So this is what you have to understand, that they are basically bearing the burden of the household responsibilities, the unpaid work. And if you just look at the number, we have, when we talk about the unpaid labor work, only 9.3% of the males do the unpaid labor work, whereas for women, it is almost 36.5%. So there is a disproportionate contribution when we talk about the unpaid work done by the women. This is the overall picture with respect to data. Now, what are the factors responsible for the low female labor force participation in the country? The very first is social norms. But what do we mean by norms? Norms are the informal rules of conduct. I'm saying informal rules of conduct that are deeply ingrained in the minds of the people. India is a society which is still very patriarchal. What we still think is that male are the main breadwinners of the family. Women's responsibility is with respect to the domestic chores. So we have this particular notion, and this is one of the reasons why we have lower participation of women in the workforce, right? You must have seen what just happened few days in Gurgaon. So you had a particular social media influencer. She wanted to basically start her own academy. Now we are not going into who was wrong or who was right. But again, understand, that's the kind of mindset which people have developed, right? So this is again a very serious situation. Look at this, social reasons. They account for almost 3.4%. If you look at the reasons reported by the females in percentage for not joining the labor force, it's almost 3.4%. Next, we have the unpaid care work. We already talked about that. Women in India, they basically suffer from time poverty. What do we mean by time poverty? On one hand, they have the domestic responsibilities. By who is responsible for washing the utensils? Who is responsible for cleaning the house? It's the women. And in some situations, and in fact, in most of the situations these days, they're also responsible for carrying out their office work, contributing financially to the home. So they have this dual responsibility. So again, it's a burden on the women. And therefore, sometimes what happens is that they have to make a choice. And they invariably make a choice with respect to their household contribution. Why? Because primarily it is because of the affection they have towards their family, right? Caring of the children. So again, if you just look at this particular infographic, childcare, personal commitment in homemaking, almost 44.5%. Again, this data is really important, right? So as to cite in the examination, in the mains answer. Next aspect is gender bias norms. There has been a kind of informal setup ingrained in the minds of people. Most of the employment opportunities we have in the country, you have to understand, they're male-centric. They're not women-centric. They do not provide the kind of flexibility which women need. Let's say during their maternity, or let's say during the other reasons. For example, when we talk about the aspects of women's safety. So different employment opportunities, they are male-centric in nature. And this is primarily because we have a particular mental setup. And we'll have to basically remove that setup. Next, we have the caste discrimination. You would ask how caste discrimination is important here. When we look at the socio-economic strata, there is a greater participation of women in the workforce when we look at low socio-economic strata. What is the reason? Because in this particular strata, the low socio-economic strata, particularly those women belonging to the low castes, they are basically involved in low profile jobs. You must have seen the domestic workers. They're doing a lot of work. The construction workers, which have, and all these jobs have low earning potential. So that is one of the very important reasons you must understand. There is the element of discrimination, which is there in this aspect also. Next, we have salary and wage disparity. Though we have the Equal Remuneration Act, 1976, we have this principle of equal pay for equal work in the directive principles. But what we see is still there is a pay disparity when we compare the males and the females. According to a survey, for a regular work, there is, a male in India earns almost 24% more than a female. And for a casual work, a male in India earns more than 48% than a woman. So that is a kind of pay disparity we have. Then we have the aspects of glass ceiling. The unconscious bias we have in our minds that women are not capable or women cannot do this task, which is absolutely rubbish. Because we have had leaders, different women who have spearheaded in different domains, taken the command. So this is what you have to understand. Then education levels also play a very important role. Look at this particular infographic. Again, very important. What you will see is that we have the literacy level increasing. Literate and up to primary, then we have the middle, then we have the secondary, higher secondary, graduate. As the levels increase, as the education levels increase, the labor force participation rate also increases. So what we are trying to say, that we should also focus upon the attainment of education levels of the women, right? That is also very important. Also, according to a survey, what it found was that the self-employed women, those who were surveyed, with any formal training were just 3%. So more than 97% of the women, they had no formal training. So there is the aspect of lack of skill development, which is there, right? So these are the factors. Also look at this. We have this particular infographic provided by the India Today group. It says that 67.2% of the females outside the labor force because of the domestic duties, right? And we have 32.8% female labor force, right? Which is, for example, we have regular wage, salaried, casual labor, self-employed. So again, you can have basically glance to this particular infographic. Why does greater female labor force participation matter in a country like India? The very first is economic growth. See, understand, if just half of the total population is contributing to the economy, obviously we'll have half of the results. Let's say the whole population contributes, even the other half of the population contributes. Definitely there would be a boost to the overall economy. What did we observe in the East Asian economies? For example, Vietnam or Thailand or these countries, in fact, including China, that there was a very important impetus. There was a very important focus given on this aspect, that there has to be the participation from the side of the women also. And therefore, what these countries saw was the unprecedented growth of development. Economic growth rates were too high, primarily because the women also contributed. Next, we have poverty reduction. Now, this is but obvious that if we will have women in the families also contributing economy, having productive livelihood opportunities, then definitely it would reduce the poverty levels in the country, right? Next, we have human capital development. Different research and studies have shown that when women earn, whatever they are earning, they tend to spend more in the development of the health aspect, of the education aspect of their children. So ultimately, it improves the standard of living and it contributes to the overall human capital development. Next, we have gender equality and empowerment. What we are trying to say, then when women would be a part of the workforce, there would be a more parity, not just in terms of the wages, but there would be an increase in the respect for the women. What we are witnessing, the crimes against women or women being treated in an inferior way, that would be reduced, right? And that is something which is really needed. Then we have fertility and population growth. Look at the southern Indian states, be it Kerala. Why they have been able to reduce the fertility rates? One of the prime reasons is that women over there contribute economically. They are a part of the labor force. Once they basically join the labor force, they have greater access to the family planning services. And therefore, there is a reduction in the fertility rate. Then we have reduced gender-based violence. Again, it's a natural reason. Why? Because once you have the women as a part of the workforce, they'll go out, they'll have more access to different services, they'll talk to different people, they would be aware about their rights, they would get to know about what rights they have, what is the institutional mechanism if a particular woman is suffering from domestic violence. So there is a kind of reduction in the overall violence against women, right? Labor market and talent pool. What we are trying to say, if we have the women coming in the labor market, the talent pool is going to increase. And this would basically spur in a competitive spirit in the market. And once there would be competitive spirit, definitely it would also lead to innovation. So that is what you have to understand, right? The next aspect is with respect to the relationship between the female labor force participation rate and the gender gap. Now, it beautifully describes that how, when we have the increase in the female labor force participation rate, how we have the narrowing down of the gender gap. Again, very important. Look at this. We have the countries like Nepal, which are having quite good labor force participation rate. Look at the numbers with respect to gender gap over here. And look at for India, we have a low labor force participation rate with respect to the females, and we have a huge gender gap. So this is a kind of correlation which you must understand. What have been the government initiatives to improve the female labor force participation rate? The very first is Code on Social Security and Code on Wages. Again, when we talk about Code on Social Security, it has some mandatory provisions with respect to the maternity benefit, with respect to the health insurance, with respect to the creche facilities, again important for the women. Next, we have Code on Wages. This again specifies or emphasizes upon the aspect of equal remuneration for both male as well as female, right? Next, we have Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Again, it was a tri-ministerial effort. I would be really happy if you tell me which were the ministries which were involved with respect to Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. And it was primarily for the survival, protection, and the educational attainment of women in the country. Next, we have the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act, which provides a very robust grievance redressal mechanism when we have women suffering from the harassment at the workplace. Next, we have the Working Women Hostel Scheme. So what the government through this particular scheme is doing is, it is basically giving funds, subsidizing the construction of working women hostels or for their upgradation, right? Next, we have one-stop centers, very, very important. These one-stop centers in different districts around the country, what they have been focusing upon is the women who are in distress, or the women who have faced violence, trying to rehabilitate them, right? And universalization of women helpline. Then we have the skilling initiatives, be it through the National Skill Development Corporation, right? Or through other mechanisms, primarily focusing upon the livelihood opportunities for the women. Then we have MGNREGA, the world's greatest food for work program. It has a reservation, a kind of a reservation for women, where 1/3 of the opportunities are given to the women. What should be the way forward to increase the female labor force participation in the country? The very first is improved access to quality education. This we have already discussed. As we'll have better educational attainment with respect to the women, definitely they would have better employment opportunities, more productive employment opportunities. Then we have access to the formal credit. The traditional lenders, for example, the banks, they're not really inclined to give funds to the women. So there has to be increased credit disbursal for the women so that they can have their own livelihood opportunities, right? Next, we have simplifying the regulatory framework. This is again very important point. Even when we are having women who are educated, who are having proper skills, who have sufficient funds, who want to come up with their own livelihood options, their own enterprises, they find it really difficult to navigate through the regulatory circles. Primarily because there is this aspect of too many compliances, and it is not really possible for women to follow all those because they have their own domestic responsibilities also, right? So again, we'll have to come up with new mechanisms. For example, the single window mechanism, right? Combating the caste discrimination, again, very, very important and a very important concern with respect to the overall social ills. We'll have to make sure that we have an equal society, right? Then role of self-help groups. We already know that how much contribution they've had. For example, Self-Employed Women Association, SEVA, or Kudumbashri. So self-help groups have definitely led to the aspects of savings, and that has in a way contributed in development of the livelihood opportunities for different women, millions of women, right? Addressing the structural rigidities. When we are talking about the structural rigidities, we are talking about the kind of ingrained setup we have. Let's talk about the glass ceiling. So these things must be done away with, right? Vocational training, again, very important. There has to be the overhauling of the skill development institutes or the ITIs, which have those programs which are women-centric in nature, right? Promoting gender-neutral social norms. And this must begin at the very family itself, where we have this aspect of treating both the male child and the female child in an equal manner. And this should be also done at the school level, so that the children develop this aspect, that there's no difference in the capabilities and the capacities of men or women, right? So these are the things which you must understand. And again, this is again a very important topic. And there's a need to increase the female labor force participation rate, not just for the economy, but also for the societal benefits, right? Let's have a mains practice question. Despite notable improvement in women's education and health outcomes, India's female labor force participation rate remains among the lowest globally. Discuss the reasons behind this paradox and suggest multi-dimensional policy measures to improve the women's workforce participation in India. 15 marks, 250 words. Please try to write the answer. It is for your benefit and you're going to get a lot of returns if you invest in this particular aspect. Let's go to the next part. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about the decarbonization of the global shipping. Let's have a look with respect to the gist of the article. We have most of the trade which is carried around the world. It is done through the sea lines of communication, what we call as the maritime trade. And these ships, they basically consume very low sulfur fuel oil or diesel as the fuel, and therefore they emit greenhouse gases. Now, as a part of our commitment to mitigate the ill effects of climate change, we have to reduce the greenhouse gas, and therefore we need sustainable interventions for the global shipping also. So the kind of alternatives we have, first we have green hydrogen, but it cannot be used in the ships because of the storage concerns. Then we have green methanol, which can be used. And finally, we have the green ammonia. Now, we cannot have a sudden transition towards the green ammonia. So therefore, we'll have to first use the green methanol and then finally we'll have a transition towards the green ammonia. But it is not something which is quite easy. It requires a lot of investments and political will. So what the article says is that we need to basically come up with new interventions or some of the schemes, for example, the production linked incentive scheme for the creation or for the development of the manufacturing of the electrolyzers. So that is what you have to understand. This is the overall gist, a very simplified article. Again, important, can be useful for the prelims. Global shipping is on course towards the decarbonization by 2040-50. This represents a huge opportunity for India. And see, look, what the author is saying is that we have a huge opportunity, primarily in the sense of becoming the production hub for the electrolyzers. We'll have a look. Merchant ships largely use very low sulfur fuel oil, diesel and methane gas, stored in liquid form as fuel. LNG powered engines with their higher efficiency of some 5 percentage points are likely to be transition fuel before shipping moves to green fuels such as green ammonia, green or e-methanol, or biofuels by 2040, right? So the transition fuel can be the LNG. How are green fuels produced? Green hydrogen is made from the electrolysis of water using renewable power. So you are basically doing the electrolysis of water, but the power you are using, it is a renewable energy, and therefore the production of hydrogen would be green hydrogen. Shipping will not use hydrogen directly because of issues with respect to the storage and transportation of hydrogen, a highly volatile fuel. Green ammonia made from green hydrogen and nitrogen is more stable. The government is also encouraging the green ammonia production in India since it can substitute the LNG imports in making fertilizers. Now, this is but obvious that if we are independent, if we are indigenously producing green ammonia, that would also in a way help in the fertilizer sector also. That can be diverted towards the fertilizer sector. So we need to become self-reliant when we talk with respect to the production of green ammonia. Green methanol is made from green hydrogen and carbon dioxide is obtained from the industrial sources. What are the preferred fuels? Shipping, however, is generally a conservative industry. New technology adoption is relatively slow. Ammonia engines are novelty. So shipping is going to first for green methanol. That's going to be the transition fuel, right? Which emits some 10% of the carbon dioxide. And later green ammonia, which emits no greenhouse gas emissions. However, ammonia use requires extensive processes on board. See, again, you have proper engines and the overall capacity of the storage and everything. If you are basically going for a new fuel, you'll have to change everything. You have to transform the whole process, the instruments, the mechanisms, and this is cost-intensive task. Besides a storage tank and tweaks to the engine and fuel handling, green methanol is almost a drop-in replacement. So what drop-in replacement means? That if we are using the green methanol, we won't require a lot of changes with respect to the instruments and the mechanisms used with respect to powering the ships, right? In the ambient temperature, unlike the green ammonia or even LNG. 100% sustainable e-methanol as bunker fuel costs almost $1,950 per ton in February in Singapore, while VLSFO averaged around $560. Look at the difference. Look at the difference in it's almost 4 times. So if you want ships to basically use or go for this particular alternative of green methanol, You'll have to incentivize them, give them subsidies. This pricing discrepancy is primarily caused by the present price of renewable electricity, with every ton of green e-methanol using almost 10 to 11 megawatt hours of power, and the heavy upfront capital cost for electrolyzer facilities. These are primary two reasons. First, the electricity which you are using, the renewable energy, it's costing more, and the electrolyzers, again, they're cost intensive. This suggests the demand for green methanol would surpass 14 million tons by 2028, whereas the projected supply is merely in the order of 11 million tons, creating additional price pressures. What is India's shipping decarbonizing plans? Plans have been made for supporting the domestic container ships using green fuels, as well as creating green fuel bunkering points such as Tuticorin Port and Kandla Port. So we are planning to come up with these facilities in these ports, right? The government is looking at producing and supplying green fuels to Singapore, which is a fueling station accounting for almost 1/4 of all global ship fueling, right? Given that India has the land and expertise for solar power, it can aspire to be a major supplier of green fuels to the global shipping. We are already investing through the Indian International Solar Alliance, or we have the other initiatives also. So definitely, why not? We can basically come up with more renewable energy and produce green ammonia or green methanol. And then we can supply these things to Singapore, or we can have our own ports, which are providing this to different ships around the world, right? How can India do it? Making a marine green fuel production has some challenges. Solar panels and electrolyzers to make green hydrogen need to be imported, because still we all know that we are critically dependent with respect to the solar cells and modules on the imports, especially from China. From 2014 till 2025, India's solar capacity grew from almost 2.82 gigawatts to almost 105 gigawatts. Look at the transformational increase in the overall solar power. This achievement was made through the convergence of sovereign guarantees, that is the guarantees given by the government. Off-take assurance. What do we mean by off-take assurance? That if I am producing a particular commodity, you give me a guarantee that you are going to buy it. That is off-take assurance. And strengthened supply chain support with respect to the overall grid supply. These government-backed assurances can fundamentally transform the project economics by enabling access to the international capital markets at significantly lower interest rates. So what do we need? Finally, we need credit at low interest, and therefore international institutions, again, the very first multilateral institutions, can be of help here. Innovative financial instruments are needed for an at-to-scale green methanol rollout. What it is trying to convey? That these projects are capitally very intensive. It requires a lot of money. So what we have to do is we basically have to go with innovative financial instruments, right? And which can basically fund these projects. Next aspect is the PLI scheme for electrolyzers can relieve the supply chain bottlenecks. We can also give incentives through the PLI schemes for the production of electrolyzers, which are the core component with respect to the production of green alternatives. For example, the green hydrogen or green ammonia. By territorializing the value chains and lessening the transportation costs of raw materials, carbon capture, utilization and storage. Very important technique, CCUS. Incentives are also essential as they increase the feasibility of the production of green methanol from the sequestered CO2. Industry is producing the CO2. You are basically collecting the CO2 and storing it. That is what the CCUS mechanism is all about. So for that also you need mechanisms in place, right? Further, the government's aggressive push in creating 1.5 gigawatt of local electrolyzer manufacturing capacity and growing industrial CO2 sources positions India strategically to develop integrated green fuel hubs. So this should be done so that we basically emerge as a hub of green fuels for these ships. Multilateral development banks offer financing rates as low as 4%. For example, the New Development Bank, right? Partnerships with overseas shipbuilders from South Korea and Japan are being pursued to support India's shipbuilding strength. It's very important. If we can focus upon the green fuel supplies for the ships, we can also focus upon the shipbuilding industry. We have countries like South Korea and Japan who have mastered the art of shipbuilding. So why can't we have the same thing, right? If we are focusing upon one aspect, the other is also possible. The strategy is to support new builds and retrofit the current ships for green fuel compatibility. India has pledged almost $10 billion support to the purchase of over 110 ships. That is what you have to understand. Now also have a look at some information which can be possibly very important for the prelims. We have the green hydrogen, right? So it uses the renewable energy and then through the electrolyzer gives the production of the green hydrogen. Then we have different types of methanol. You can just have a look. Brown methanol uses coal. Then we have gray methanol, uses the natural gas. We have blue methanol, uses the blue hydrogen, right? in combination with captured CO2. Then we have green methanol. What does it use? It uses the biomethanol produced from biomass or e-methanol produced from green hydrogen, captured CO2 and renewable electricity, right? Then we have the green ammonia. We have the production of the hydrogen through the electrolysis using the renewable energy. And then we have the air separation unit, basically extracting the nitrogen. And through the Haber-Bosch process, we have the production of green ammonia. And then it can be used in different applications, industrial as well as production of fertilizers or the other activities. This is what you need to know. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to a very important body, which is the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee. Now, there is a mention of this particular body in a particular article. Now, what it says is that there has been the permission to conduct the field trials for the genetically modified maize in Punjab, right? So, it's only about trials. We're not talking about the full-fledged commercial deployment. We are talking about the trials, right? So, we have the field trials of two kinds of genetically modified maize are expected to begin this Kharif season at the Punjab Agricultural University, weeks after the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, the country's top regulator for the sector. So we have the genetic engineering sector. For this, we have the GEAC, which is the top regulator, gave the nod for the trials after receiving the consent from the Punjab government. Conduct of confined field trials of herbicide-tolerant transgenic maize. What is herbicide-tolerant? It means that once you'll spray the herbicide on this plant, it would not affect the plant. It would rather kill the weeds which are present, right? And insect resistance transgenic maize. So let's say you have some insects or pests. So once you're spraying this, it would not affect the quality of the plant. Rather, it would only kill these pests. The Coalition for GM-Free India, a platform for advocating safe and sustainable agriculture, has urged the Punjab government to withdraw its no objection certificate for the trials. We have these NGOs which basically work in the environment domains, and they don't want the conduct of these trials, right? Because see, again, genetically modified crops, they have their own concerns, right? The state government had issued order prohibiting the usage of glyphosate, and a deadly herbicide, with large body of scientific literature pointing to its negative impacts on human health and environment. So what they're saying is that the state government itself of Punjab, it had issued orders of banning glyphosate. And right now in the trials, what they would be using is glyphosate. So why you're opposing your own verdict or your own rules? So therefore, you should stop this. Now, so we have the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee. It is a part of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And I have taken these screenshots from the website of this particular body itself. Again, this is from where the UPSC extracts the questions. The GESC functions under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. As per the rules of 1989, it is responsible for the appraisal of activities involving the large-scale use of hazardous microorganisms and recombinants in research and industrial production from the environmental angle. It assesses whether we can have these genetically modified organisms in use at the commercial level or not, right? So for that, it basically gives the permission even for the trials. The committee is also responsible for appraisal of proposals relating to the release of genetically engineered organisms and products into the environment, including experimental field trials. GEAC is chaired by the Special Secretary, Additional Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, co-chaired by a representative from the Department of Biotech. So this is also important. You have one representative from the Department of Biotechnology. Presently, it has 24 members and meets every month to review the applications in the area above. Functions of GEAC. So we have, under the rules of 1989, to appraise activities involving the large-scale use of hazardous microorganisms and recombinants in research and other things, to appraise a proposal relating to the genetically engineered organisms and products into the environment, including the experiment. The committee or any persons authorized by it has the powers to take punitive actions under the Environment Protection Act. So primarily, the basis lies in Environment Protection Act. Remember that. Composition, we have the chairman, we already discussed this. Members, representative of the concerned agencies and departments, namely the Ministry of Industrial Development, Department of Biotechnology, Department of Atomic Energy. Then we have some expert members. For example, we have the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, Medical Research, right? Member Secretary, an official of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, is the Member Secretary. This is what you need to know. Again, an important body, possibly a question in the prelims can come. Let's talk about the other article. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to a very important concept which is known as linguistic secularism. Now, the gist of the article is that whenever we think about this particular word secularism, we feel that it is restricted to the religion. That is, it is a separation of the state from the religion. But according to the author, it's not just about the religion. It's also about the language. Especially in a country like India, where we have people speaking different languages, there are numerous languages. We cannot have one particular language dominating the other. And what we have been seeing, different instances, especially in the state of Maharashtra, is that people are being forced to speak a particular language. So according to the author, it goes against the very principles of Indian polity, the very principles of Indian constitution, right? That is tolerance. And this is at the core of linguistic secularism, right? So India's diversity in religion and language is one of the primary factors which protects the secular character of the nation, ensuring its unity and integrity. But while religion and language are the two most crucial aspects of any culture, these are also the predominant cross-cultural barriers. And this is the reason we have people fighting over these issues of religion or language, right? This is clearly visible in recent communal tensions and the violence in Maharashtra. Secularism in India is different from the West practices. So, see, we have a principled distance approach where we intervene when it is required. But in the West, we have a complete separation of the church and the state. This is what you have to understand. When the concept originated in England in mid-19th century, it was explained that there should be complete separation between the state and the religion. In India too accepted this notion and incorporated the concept in the constitution in the form of rights to religious freedom. So we have the right to conscience and to freely practice, propagate, and profess the religion, right? These rights are based on the principles of religious tolerance and equality. Every person has the equal right to freedom of conscience and to profess, practice, and propagate. This makes India truly secular, as the state does not have its own religion. These are the fodder points which you can also use in your GS2 answer, including in GS1 also. However, the unique aspect of Indian secularism is not related to the religion, but it is also concerned with the language. Indian secularism is neither pro-religion or language, nor against. Yet, it is not neutral either. It is incorporated in the constitution as a state policy, and it empowers the state to take steps against the communalism. Official versus national language. We have official language, but there is no national language. This is what you have to understand. This is the reason why we do not have or cannot have a national language. In order to protect the linguistic diversity, we have the 8th schedule of the constitution, which includes 22 languages. As India is a unitary federation, that is a union of states. Article 1 itself says India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. Article 343 enshrines that the official language, not the national language, of the union shall be Hindi in Devanagari script. The states are free to choose their own official language. This is because that in India, the states are culturally integrated and no state is permitted to go out from it in the name of distinct language or culture. Article 29, we have the minority rights with respect to the protection of language or culture. Incorporates as any section of citizens, including the minority, shall have the right to protect their language, script, or culture. These three words are important: language, script, and culture. And language cannot be the ground for discrimination. Also, according to Census 2011, India has 121 languages and 270 mother tongues. About 96% of the population of the country has one or the other of the 22 languages which are mentioned in the 8th schedule. And they use this as a mother tongue. Finally, the census says that the 121 languages are presented in two parts: languages included in the 8th schedule and the languages not included in the 8th schedule, which are 99 in number. Respecting diversity is the most important thing. Such diversity needs to be protected, and each and every language, irrespective of the region or state, must be shown respect, right? This is the only way to protect the India's linguistic secularism. Many southern states and northeastern states have resisted the imposition of Hindi and citing the fears of cultural domination. See, every region has its own language. Why to force a particular language on the other, right? Dravidian movements in Tamil Nadu historically opposed the Hindi opposition, favoring the Tamil and English. Maharashtra, however, has emerged the most sensitive state so far as the language debate is concerned. The recent violence against the non-Marathi population in the manifestation of identity politics, definitely it is not to protect the cultural identity. Had it been related to the protection of culture, the protectors of Marathi language would have considered tolerance and liberality are also the pillars of India's unity in diversity. So if you are protecting your culture, that's fine. But again, you have to understand the core values of Indian ethos, the democratic ethos, it relates to the aspects of tolerance. Why you're not practicing that? In a globalizing world, a conservative leaning towards religion or language will lead to the fragmentation of the society and tear apart the secular fabric. So we need to basically see again, you speak a particular language, it's good, but you cannot impose a particular language on the other, right? We have our diversity and that has to be protected. This is what the article says. Let's go to the next article. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to a very important input in the agriculture, which is biostimulant. So we have the Union Agriculture Minister who has said that the ministry is going to take strict action if it finds that there is illegal supply of these biostimulants in the market, right? We'll see what these biostimulants are all about. The government will not allow the sale of biostimulants without scientific nod. The minister has directed the officials of his ministry to put in place a clear standard procedure for the sale of biostimulants. Now, only those biostimulants that meet all the criteria and are proven beneficial to the farmers will be approved. Approvals will now be based upon the scientific validation, and the responsibility for this will rest entirely with the concerned officials. He also emphasized the need for Indian Council of Agriculture Research to evaluate the biostimulants. Biostimulants, again, the definition can be asked in the prelims. Please pay attention. Are substances or microorganisms, for example, fungi, bacteria, or plant extracts, can also be the plant extracts, that when applied to the seeds or plants or soil, stimulate the natural plant process. So they are the natural extracts or the bacteria or the fungi, and you are applying them on the plants, and they would stimulate the development of the plant. That is biostimulants. Around 30,000 biostimulant products were being sold unchecked. The biostimulants market in India was valued at approximately $355 million in 2024 and is projected to reach almost $1.13 billion by 2032. Look at this. We have different biostimulants. So it can be acids, for example, the humic substances, right? Or amino acids or fatty acids, lipids. Then we have extracts, for example, the seaweeds. We have the plant-derived active substances, polyphenols. Then we have the microbials, for example, the beneficials, fungi, bacteria, right? Then we have the inorganic salts, right? Now, you have to understand this, that what really happens. We have different stresses, for example, the cold or heat. Then we have abiotic stress from drought, salinity, heavy metals. Now, once we apply these stimulants, it basically helps plant to grow better, right? For example, the algal extracts or proteins, soil microorganisms, or humic acids, right? Look at the market. As I told you, the market is growing exponentially, but most of these biostimulants are basically being sold in an illegal way. So that is what the Union Agriculture Minister is saying, that we basically need to control it, right? If the scientific approval is done, if you are basically following the procedure, then it's fine. But if you are selling it without permission, without proper scientific nod, then it's wrong. Let's go to the last article. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to a very important body which can be asked in the examination, which is the Insurance Regulatory Development Authority of India. So IRDAI has basically formed panels to probe into certain matters related to the insurance sector. The IRDAI has constituted panels of its whole-time members to decide on the violations by certain insurance intermediaries, right? So what is this particular body? IRDAI is a statutory body, right? So it was formed on the basis of the IRDAI Act of 1999, set up for protecting the interests of the policyholders, insurance policyholders, and regulating and promoting and ensuring orderly growth of the insurance industry in India. We have Section 14 of the IRDAI Act 1999 lays down the duties, powers, and functions of IRDAI. Subject to the provisions of the Act and other law, for the time being in force, the authority shall have the duty to regulate, promote, and ensure the orderly growth of the insurance business and reinsurance business without prejudice to the generality of the provisions contained in subsection 1. The powers and functions of the authority shall include, first, to certify the insurance companies. For example, we have different insurance companies. We have the general insurance, we have the health insurance companies. Protect the interests of the policyholders, adjudication of the disputes. So this is again a statutory body and again regulatory body for the insurance setup. That's it from my side. I hope the discussion was useful for you. Thank you so much. All the very best. Thank you.